Greetings and hello to everyone. This is the Business of Betting podcast, and I'm your host, Jake Williams. Today is episode 32, and we have Sally Snow joining the show. Sally has been working in bookmaking since her time at Sydney Racetracks, working for Tom and Bill Waterhouse. Today, she continues to work on the bookmaking side of the TAB. Sally talks about her approach to bookmaking and betting, as well as what she has discovered in her years of working in the industry. This podcast is proudly sponsored by Betfair. Betfair operates a betting exchange and is licensed in the Northern Territory of Australia. Residents of Australia can join Betfair by visiting betfair.com.au and support this podcast by using promo code BOBPOD. Please gamble responsibly. As always, you can find us at businessofbetting.com or at bettingpod on Twitter. Please fire in any questions or feedback and potential guests you would like to hear from. So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy my chat with Sally Snow. Today, I'm joined by Sally Snow. Sally, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Jake.
So Sally, let's get into your background a little bit. How did you get involved in, horse racing and betting? Did you start younger? Was it in your family? Did you develop it through your teenage years? Can you just take us through, your early days in betting? Yeah,
sure. So my dad has always been involved in racing from a very young age. His father, my grandfather, was a bookmaker, and my dad is still a bookmaker. So you could definitely say it's in my blood. He introduced me back to the track just after I finished high school, and I started working as a bookmaker's clerk at the races part-time while I was at uni studying a business management degree. And unfortunately, looking back at it now, I wish I would have completed it, but at the time I was studying, as I said, working part-time at the track, and I was hooked pretty early on, and knew that was the path I wanted to take in my career. And I remember sitting in a business ethics lecture on a Wednesday, listening to my lecturer explain a really boring topic about ethics, around how it was unethical to steal pens from work in the workforce or something like that, and I just knew that that was not where I needed to be, and I got up and left, and I never looked back. I actually started working at the track full time, and managed to make a career out of it. So you could definitely say I was hooked early on. My sisters were also clerks at the races, but I definitely took to the betting side of things more seriously. And after working for a bookie called David Baxter, I started working for Tom and Bill Waterhouse out at the races, and I did that for about 4 or 5 years. And that was when things kind of really changed for me in terms of my involvement in the industry and in betting, and how seriously I suppose I took it, and how much I wanted to be part of it. At the time, Tom and Bill were, holding more money on track than any other bookie, and it was just an extremely exhilarating feeling being out on course and taking bets and hedging bets and making a lot of decisions kind of on behalf of Tom and whatnot. But I learned a lot, and I knew that I wanted to make a career out of it early on.
So I want to get to your time with Tom and Bill, but before that, as a young person who's involved in racing, whether it's your teenage years or as you get a little bit older, when your father's a bookmaker, do you think about things from a bookmaker's perspective, or are you out there wanting to bet? Because I guess myself and a lot of my friends, we went out to the track like most people and had no experience or involvement on the bookmaking side at all, so we wanted to go out there and have a bet. Do you do the opposite when you're heavily involved in the bookmaking side?
No, I mean, more so now, yes, because I can see how hard it is to be a punter. But early doors, when I was out on track, punting was pretty much the only thing on my mind. I remember having a few bad experiences that taught me a lot of lessons on course. I remember I think my dad was at a country meeting one day, and Longrow was having its last start at Randwick, and I managed to go out there, and I wasn't working. I was having a day out, and I was kind of getting everyone's tips on the morning of that race meeting at Randwick, and listening to my dad on the phone to a series of people that he was speaking to, and he was just declaring this horse, said you couldn't possibly have a bet, but it'll just win. And I thought, well, if it just wins, it just wins. So I think I unloaded pretty much all of my life savings at the time when I was about 20 years old or something, and learned a very hard lesson when it got rolled. I think at the $1.20. But
you remember who beat it?
Grand Army.
Okay, yeah, it's one of those things. You remember those losing bets pretty clearly, not all the winning ones.
Remember it, very, very clearly. I disappeared from all my friends I was with on the day, and I went up into the stands and watched it by myself. And I just remember standing there in disbelief and thinking, it is going to catch it. It is going to catch it. And Grand Army just bolted ahead, and Longrow made up a little bit of ground late, but it was the race was over pretty much halfway down the straight, and I died inside. I just stood there and what am I going to do with myself?
Yeah, that's probably a feeling a lot of people have had. So take us through your time when you started with Tom Waterhouse and Bill. What was it like back then? What was the experience like at the racetrack?
Yeah, well, it was fantastic. There was obviously a lot of action back in the day, going back, this would be 12 to 15 years ago now, about 12 years ago. And yeah, look, there was just a lot of money on course, and Tom and Bill were I suppose a great team. I learned a lot from them both, in the sense that Tom was probably one of the more shrewder operators that I've ever worked with, and Bill was completely fearless. As we all know, he just wanted to take on the world. I remember one day when Tom was on holidays, and I was kind of running the stand for Tom, and had pretty strict instructions, but Bill wanted to tear away my sheet with all the bookies' contact numbers that I used to bet back with, and he wanted to hide it from me so I could just take on people and not hedge any bets. He just wanted to take on the world. But no, I learned a lot from them, and I knew very early on that there was a lot of kind of traps for young players out on course, and it was pretty easy to kind of be taken advantage of if you didn't know what you were doing. But I think also for myself, a lot of people maybe underestimated my ability based on the fact that I was young and female, and I managed to kind of get away with a few things that I think if I was a younger bloke, I might not have got away with things. I remember having a few bets, and I always used to get a couple of rolls off bookies, and I just use that to my advantage, I suppose.
So how did Tom impact your style the most? Was it sort of his intellect or his discipline, consistency? What were some of the things that made him so shrewd and I guess so successful?
Yeah, no, he was definitely consistent in his approach, but he had a great feeling for the market, and knew kind of when to take someone on and when to hold back, and knew that without going into too many details, he had just a great knowledge of the marketplace itself and what it took to move runners in the marketplace, and when to really take some big stands. I remember back when we were playing a few really, really big punters, and he had a bit of that fearless type of attitude that Bill kind of would have instilled in him, but he was just a really good reader of the marketplace, and knew how to kind of manage people as well, and manage customers, manage punters.
So how has that helped, I guess, today? Do you, because I would imagine the numbers aren't what they were, and things are a little bit different now. Can you still implement a lot of those different techniques and strategies, and I guess the intent behind what Tom and Bill were doing?
Yeah, definitely. As much as the money's dried up on course, I'd say that we're dealing in larger sums of money now. Now that I'm working at the tab, I'd say that the money or the holds are definitely greater, and a lot of those skills that I learned back in the day. And I suppose it's one of those things that you can't really teach. You can't go to a bookmaking school or study bookmaking. It's one of those things that, as I said, it's hard to teach, and it's that nous type factor. And I think, being exposed or being in the industry for so long, a lot of people just either have it or you don't. And it's a really, really hard thing to, instill in someone who's new to the industry. And I think a lot of the skills that I have now, I definitely learnt from the time I spent on course. I still apply a lot of those kind of foundation things. A lot of just, not being taken advantage of and realizing, what it takes to move money and basically how to operate, I think is, and when I say operate, using all the intelligence of the marketplace to make kind of informed decisions.
The Betfair Exchange isn't a house that sets the odds. It's betting at its purest. One punter's opinion against another's. Play the game within the game at betfair.com.au. Gamble responsibly.
So how important do you think, looking back, I guess spending at least some time at university was, and delving into sort of the business side at university and understanding, I guess you probably did finance and economics classes and things like that. You mentioned the wonderful ethics classes that you did, but how useful or valuable is that, or how necessary is it? Can you treat it like an apprenticeship and a trade in a sense where you spend hours and hours? And I know there's some thoughts out there that to be an expert, you got to spend 10,000 hours doing something. Is bookmaking in your mind in that sort of vein where you just have to spend hours and hours churning it out, taking bets, have winning days, losing days, and I guess every day is probably different no matter what, and you've just got to spend the time doing it?
Yeah, for sure. The more races that you look at and watch and, see through right from, when prices are enabled or go up early, whether it's, the day before or 4 days before, and watch how that market evolves all the way through to jump time. The more of those type of races that you can look at and view and look at how the market flows and read into that, the more experience you're going to have at better reading those markets. It's I think it is a lot of doing the same over and over again and trying to learn from your mistakes and understand why things move the way they did and apply that to the next race that you approach. But I do wish that I would have completed my degree, and I do think that when my kids go back to school, go back and complete it. I think it's good to, going to university. I don't think I would have necessarily picked up a whole lot of skills that I could apply to my current role. I think I definitely got a lot more through my experience than I would so have at uni. But I think there's something to be said about applying yourself and committing yourself to something over 3 years or 4 years. And in my current role now, if I wanted to progress into like a general manager type role, then I think, it's not necessarily a degree, it's not necessarily something that's going to get me the job over someone else, but I suppose it's more a personal kind of satisfaction that I'd like to kind of tick that box and, say that I've done it and basically finish something that I started. But I do think that in terms of the skill set, I think I'd picked up more from, the time I've spent on course and the exposure that I've had, through Tabcorp, than, what I learnt at uni.
Sure. So how do you approach bookmaking, and I guess what is your intent or strategy when it comes to bookmaking? Are you looking at it purely race by race, or are you thinking about it over a race day, maybe a Saturday meeting, or are you thinking even longer term, sort of a whole season or a whole carnival? Can you just give us an insight into your mindset?
Yeah, sure. So I think consistency is definitely key, and I think you've got to treat every race completely separate. Obviously, there's certain strategies that we might apply to carnival periods, but from my individual perspective, doing the form for me was never really my thing. I was always surrounded by people that were, really good at doing the form and put a lot of hours into it. So even kind of growing up, and then after, meeting my husband, who's a punter now, And then you take my father, for example. Both of them, specialize in a certain state and spent a lot of hours doing the form. So I never really saw the importance in me going ahead and spending hours doing it myself when I was able to access a lot of good information based on people who were successful at it and produced a lot of good work out of it. So my approach to bookmaking is more using information and market intelligence and literally applying that to each race completely separately versus a longer term kind of strategy. I think if you apply yourself to a race to race and try and remain consistent, that's going to be better for you long term.
Was there any exceptions, and maybe even sort of 10 years ago on track when you had these enormous punters that potentially, can put you out of business with a big day or a big week or a big month? Did you play them sort of person to person or man for man, for want of a better term, so you could, I guess, play a little cat and mouse and think about things a little bit differently? Or was it always simply about your book for that race and how you wanted to approach it and you kept it ultra consistent?
No, definitely when it comes to customers, you've got to play the man or the woman. You've got to be able to, have a consistent, I suppose, way that you approach it. But if a customer wants to bet in a certain manner, you've got to be agile enough to make decisions to take on those bets. There's obviously always going to be thresholds and ceiling limits, but definitely you've got to be able to, again, use that nous, I suppose, to make a decision of when to relax some of those limits that you might have had for a consistent, I suppose, race to race basis, and when to tighten them up. So that definitely, you've got to be agile in your approach there when it comes to playing customers who throughout the day have different betting patterns.
You mentioned that market intelligence is really important. Maybe your most important strength wasn't doing the form, but it was sort of seeing the fluctuations and watching things and placing value on different, I guess, pieces of information. How do you go about doing that? Do you absorb absolutely everything? Are you on social media? Are you getting information from the track? Are you speaking to people that are looking at horses? How does that actually play out? Because most people probably haven't been behind the counter at a bookmaker or understand necessarily. But from your perspective, and maybe you can't share everything or don't want to share everything, but what are some of the things that you can use to sort of put all the pieces together?
Well, a lot of the information that I'm looking at is public information. So, whilst I might have, tools that are a little bit more advanced than someone would, out in the public, it pretty much all is there. I definitely think, market intelligence is the most, important factor in how I approach things. If you look at, the SP of a market, you'd say that's, it's the most pure, and you're going to have a big head start in the game if you can, try and figure out where a market is going to, SP. So in the lead up to a race, say you might have, most bookmakers betting, 125 to 130%. If you can work out, where that 15% is going to get shaved off, and work out which runners are going to SP what, it's a big head start. And to do that, you've got to look at a number of things, but all the kind of pieces of the puzzle, lie within the market. So it's obviously the fluctuations. It's, yes, the use of, customer information and intelligence, but it's also the exchanges, the totes and how they play into the market, especially late in betting. And it's, look, you can go into a race meeting and then start, incorporating track bias and so forth as well. So it's a lot of pieces of a very big puzzle, and you've got to, I suppose, give certain weightings to certain factors, and piece it all together, and then, try and figure out or anticipate, what runner's going to start what, and if you can, get halfway there, I think it's a big start in in being not only a successful bookie, but you could also apply the same skills to punting.
Let's talk price. Unlike bookies and totes, the Betfair Exchange is a low-margin, buy-sell, fixed-odds marketplace where the value stays with the punter, not the house. Ready for the game within the game? Join betfair.com.au. Gamble responsibly.
Have any opinion on where it's sort of heading? I guess maybe in terms of Sydney racing with regards to totes and fixed odds. I know you see, or I certainly see, Hong Kong or Japan or some of these places and how they do it in terms of their betting structure. Is it going to be a combination of both moving forward, do you think?
Yeah, I think that'll likely to be the case. I mean, there's a lot of talk at the moment about a global tote pool, which which could be on the horizon. I'm not entirely sure, but I think the future for bookmaking in New South Wales is, I think they'll likely always be the two, but in terms of corporate competition, I suppose, I think there's going to be always a very strong competition, but I think there'll be less players, I think, in the marketplace with, a few of the bigger entities merging. Obviously, Tabcorp and Tats have obviously merged to just recently to create, one of the biggest gambling and entertainment companies globally. So I think, on the horizon that we might see that, the market consolidate even further. But I think we've got to continue to look at, new ways to invigorate the tote and invigorate turnover and attract, the new generation and younger punters to the industry. I think Racing New South Wales have done a great job, obviously, with the Everest and creating the hype and the success that they did off one race after 1 year was, I think, tremendous. And I think that's what we've got to continue to do, is look for new ways to operate. I think if you look at the moment, the whole kind of corporate landscape is a little bit the same. I think it seems like everyone's holding hands together and operating exactly the same way. So I suppose that's where, my role's changed in the last couple of years, and rather than, focusing on, bookmaking and risk management, which, there's still obviously a very big element of that, but, we've employed a lot of quant traders and analysts to create modelling. So that's definitely not, I suppose, the biggest makeup of my role. I've got to think more about how we, take our brand into the future and how we kind of create new products and new ways for people to become engaged with the industry and engaged with thoroughbred racing in all states, not only in New South Wales. So, yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but I think that's where it's all headed.
No, that makes sense. And what about, you mentioned earlier you had a list of names with people that you would bet back with. What role do you think exchanges or an exchange could play moving forward? Is it just one of those things that it's more tailored to professionals and obviously professional horse racing traders that want to, trade on a lot of races and have a lot of volume? Or is there a further, I guess, component to not just totes and fixed odds betting, but we can have a vibrant exchange culture in horse racing?
Yeah, I don't think, just firstly, like in terms of hedging and so forth, I think that was definitely a big part of like the on-course experience. I wouldn't say that, hedging bets and betting back is something that we see a lot of, nowadays. I think it's more about, managing the risk within rather than looking to hedge. But the exchanges themselves, I don't know if they've, taken off in the way in Australia that they did in the UK. I think just in the last couple of years, I think it's become a little bit weaker. I'd say we've done a few, new things and looking at a few different strategies about, the focus on the exchanges itself. And I personally just think they're weaker than the perception out there that the exchange is everything and the exchange is the price. I tend to disagree with that. I think the focus and the most pure price is where the majority of the money is, and I'd argue that that sits with the tab. and that the strength of the marketplace is where the turnover is. So yeah, I see the exchanges always being there and being a key factor, I suppose, but I think they're becoming weaker in the current landscape when it comes to thoroughbred racing.
So was it, I guess, more of a factor in the past years? I know a lot of people I've spoken to have said things like, look, you watch Betfair and your mind blows up. You don't know what's necessarily going to happen, or you can't explain things, and you spend hours trying to figure out, and sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing. Is it just another piece of market intelligence that you have to interpret and decide if it's noise or if it's valid?
Yeah, there's a lot of professionals obviously that use the exchange, and because they use the exchange, I suppose that's where you've got to be, wary of how the exchange works and how it can be manipulated, and how to read, what might be a dummy and what might be a one goer. It's a factor, but I think it's becoming less of a factor as time goes on. So it's not something that you'd hold your hat on and say that you've got to be trying to take the best price on the exchange, or the exchange is where the market is. I think that's it's becoming less about the exchange and more about the marketplace. And I'd say the marketplace is the tab fixed odds price.
Interesting. So I want to look forward a little bit. And you mentioned the quants and the quant traders you've got. Obviously, we're in a sort of information age, and that's sort of impacted wagering as well. There's so much out there. Where do you see all that heading? I guess for those who aren't, deeply involved or in the back office and don't see it, you hear about, AI and machine learning and all this sort of stuff. Where does it seem to be heading from your perspective as a participant in Sydney racing?
Well, I think, it's no surprise that automation and technology has not only been rolled out in our industry, but, across the entire world in all fields. So, that's the reality, but it's combining the two, isn't it? It's what automation does is creates, more consistency in approaches. So I think that can only be a good thing in terms of your longevity in a successful model. But I think you definitely need to be able to combine the both. What weighting you give to each is probably up to you. But yeah, I don't think you can completely expect a computer or a robot or automation to take over our industry completely. It's there's too many intricacies, I suppose, within, and as I said, there'll always be too many traps that look, one day a robot might be able to pick up on it, but certainly I don't think in the next 5 years we're still going to need the feel and nous of people that know what they're looking at and have that talent for doing so to simply add the value on top of the technology and on top of the automation. I think it's key to anyone's success on the punting side and on the bookmaking side.
I want to ask you about being a woman in this industry, and I'm loath to ask, but you're probably one of the best people to talk to about it. What are some of the things, or what sort of advice can you give to women who are interested in betting or bookmaking and want to get involved?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I suppose you don't even really need the interest early on. You need the kind of exposure. I think that's the one thing I suppose I'd love to change about the industry is create a better pathway for females to gain exposure to how good it is really, and how much fun it is. I think there's a lot of really smart, intelligent females that might be studying commerce and finance that think a direct path out of a degree like that is straight into a finance or a banking type role. But essentially, we do the same similar thing here and look at numbers all day. We just get to watch races and a lot of sport on top. So yeah, I think creating a pathway and making sure that we're giving exposure to people about our industry and about this type of field is important. I think that means going out to universities and creating more opportunities. We've currently actually got 4 interns here at Tabcorp at the moment that are have a range of degrees and backgrounds, but around stats and finance and commerce, and they're paid interns here at the moment and working on modelling. I think 2 of them being females. I think doing more of that and gaining that exposure to people and creating those opportunities are really important, because it's such a great industry and so much fun to be a part of. I remember I loved working on course, but I ended up getting the role at Tabcorp. I started in a marketing role with Glenn Lee, who actually still is at Tabcorp, and I got the role through a friend of mine, Mark Ryman, who I met on course. And even though I started off in a marketing role, I knew it was never really something that I wanted to do. I was desperate to kind of be across on the other side where all the bookmakers were. And I remember Sean Byrne, actually. I think you've interviewed. Have you interviewed Sean Byrne?
Yeah, he was the very first. A very good man, Sean.
Yeah, the first one. Yeah, top bloke. He gave me my, I suppose, first start when Luxbet first started off in 2008, and gave me my first opportunity to be exposed to that bookmaking side of things. And to be honest, my time spent on course, I was a clerk. I wasn't a bookie. I was learning a lot, but it wasn't until I kind of got that start from Sean and was sitting there kind of taking the bets myself and making decisions. It wasn't my money, but I certainly wrote it like it was, and I learned a lot from those people. So I think it's all about getting that first kind of foot in the door type scenario and getting that exposure. And I think a lot of females might think that they don't know enough. Typically females underestimate their abilities, but I think if you can kind of get that foot in the door and gain exposure through the people around you. And I was really lucky to have some really good managers in the past who taught me a lot, Sean being one of them. But I think a lot of my experiences and skill set have been on the job training. I don't think it's something that I necessarily knew before I started. It was just something that I picked up. I remember my managers in the past have always kind of forced me to make decisions for myself, and you really learn from those type of mistakes. I remember back in the day early on when I first started off, and we had like a external price assessor who provided like a set of prices for us to work off. And I remember falling into the biggest trap of all time when I the price or the rating for this particular runner might have been 50s. It was definitely a roughie, and I absolutely gapped it because I was holding too strong or I was too aligned to this external price. It was a Mark Kavanagh first starter, and I remember just absolutely gapping. It was like 20s into 4 to 1 or something like that, and definitely learnt the hard way that I needed to not hold on to a single point, and that's where I kind of picked up that I've got to use all those different pieces of information to make decisions and not just hold on to one. But I think just you pick all that stuff up by by learning and by trading and by watching races and you never stop learning. I mean, I'm in a very different role now to what I was when I first started, and now I'm lucky enough to manage a larger team of thoroughbred traders who I definitely say that I learn a lot from. Even now I think some of the best non-professional punters probably sit within these 4 walls at Tabcorp, and I'm lucky enough to work with those people every day. People like Peter Todd, who I'm not sure if you know the name, but he was a bookmaker back in the day around the time my dad was on course, and he's now doing form on New South Wales racing, and I get to be exposed to all these people who have a very different view on how to be successful in the game, but all have a very different skill set and some are great traders and some are great, form analysts, and you've got to just keep on learning from people and keep watching races, and you can definitely aspire to be successful without kind of knowing a whole lot before you enter the door. I think you've just got to have a will and a passion to love what you do and apply yourself and keep learning, because I don't think there's one person in the game that would say that they have the keys to the kingdom. It's definitely a learning experience, and you've got to be agile enough to change up the way that you do things and evolve as a punter and as a bookmaker as time goes on, because it is changing at a rapid pace.
It's a very good response. What about on the product side? And is it a myth that we need to start creating products for women or start thinking about that? Do you already do that? Do you think about if there's any concepts or approaches or bet types or whatever it might be that would be better suited, or is that just a naive myth that men think about?
Yeah, I'd say that's a naive myth that men think about. What were you suggesting, that we, create like a pink website or something for girls and make it all kind of fluffy? And
that's what us naive men would say. But a lot of people ask, or I ask them honestly, like what sort of percentage are male versus female? And sadly, the joking answer is all the female accounts are probably bowler accounts. And they ask similar questions: what can be done, or what should be done, or how can it be approached, and things like that from a female perspective. And I think it sounds like the overwhelming response is that education, just like anyone who may be active or involved or might want to get involved, you just got to start getting them involved and educating them on different things and building up their acumen, and then it'll take care of himself, whether it's male, female, Australian, English, American, Indian, whatever it is. It's irrelevant for the most part.
Yeah, no, I think the worst thing you could do is try and, offer a different product suite to, a female audience to try and get them engaged in the sport. It not only kind of downplays, females' intelligence, but we're not different. We're just not exposed, I suppose, to betting. I know I love it, but yeah, no, I definitely wouldn't be attracted to a different product suite that was, targeted at females. I think it's just an education and an exposure piece versus being treated any different to a normal customer. I think, that's where the stigma lies, I suppose, in men assuming that you need to do something different. There's a lot of intelligent women out there who I think, are successful at the game and have a lot of value to add. It's just, how do we breed that new generation and gain that exposure for them? And I think, doing so through, universities and it's a shame, because I think on course is not like it was, 10, 15 years ago when I started out and got that great pathway. But I think, there's definitely other ways rather than doing kind of targeted campaigns or targeted promotions. It's all about education and exposure and creating an environment where they know it's, that they can apply their skill set. So there's, not the age-old myth where people think that, bookies are all, 70 to 80-year-old men with bags around their shoulders. It's a sport where, females can enter it and be successful.
Yeah, and it sounds like, based on what you've described, it is a dynamic and interesting job, for want of a better word. Passion, those type of things are important, and it can be something that can be improved. And obviously, from a punting perspective, there's a lot of, if you go to Flemington during the carnival, I'm sure it's the same in Randwick and Rosehill, it's not just men there. So from that education piece, converting, party goers, for want of a better term, to those interested in racing should be one of the main perspectives. I'm very grateful for your time, Sally. Before I let you go, I just wanted to, you're on Twitter, right? Can you give those who are interested in following you and what you're up to your Twitter address?
I think it's as simple as at Sally Snow. maybe with an underscore, but I think it's at Sally Snow.
There you go. I'll make sure there's a link to it, so if anyone is interested, they can give you a follow on Twitter and see what you're up to. Thank you very much, Sally. I really appreciate your time, and it's great to chat.
Thanks, Jake.
Residents of Australia can join Betfair by visiting betfair.com.au, and please support this podcast by using promo code BOBPOD. Gamble responsibly.